Hi, this is Brad Greenquist, and you're watching Pop Culture with Pat. Remember, the barrier was not meant to be crossed. The ground beyond is sour.
Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. On today's show, I have special guest Brad Greenquist, who played Victor Pascow in the original Pet Sematary. Thank you for coming on the show today, Brad.
Oh, thank you for having me, Pat. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, how did you, getting into things, how did you first hear about Pet Sematary?
Well, back in the early 80s, you couldn't not hear about it because the novel was so popular. So popular. Everybody was reading it. And I hadn't read it. Then, as far as the film goes, it was just an audition in a string of many auditions I had. This one, it looks like I booked, if I'm not mistaken.
And that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you now. So you were, it sounds like obviously familiar with the novel, and you said that you hadn't read it before you got the role. Now, have you ended up reading the book since then?
Oh yeah. After I booked the role, well, I started to read it, during the audition process. But there wasn't enough time to finish the whole novel. So then when I did book it, I read the whole novel. I read it a couple of times and read a number of Stephen King's other novels as well, because I hadn't read any of his novels at that time.
Oh, wow.
At that time, I read a lot, but at that time I was reading all these big Russian novelists, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and all of those big, huge novels with long Russian names. So I wasn't reading anything contemporary at the time. So I read a lot of Stephen King's, or a number of Stephen King's novels. And Pet Sematary I read, 2 or 3 times. And then I also, when I was shooting, I carried the novel with me every day on the set, so that just before we shot, I could look at the scene, reread the scene, and once we had blocked everything, I could bring in things that may not have been in the screenplay but were in the novel, certain descriptions and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. And one of the things, Victor Pascow, I think he's such a fascinating character just because he walks the line of being kind of this creepy specter entity, but in the end he's really trying to help out Lewis. How did you go about approaching this character and, being able to kind of walk that line?
Well, the makeup did the makeup and the editing did everything that was necessary for the scary stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Generally. And I saw that both myself and Mary Lambert, we had talked about this quite a bit, and we saw Victor Pascow as a force of benevolence, more of a guardian angel than some ghastly thing from the other side. And as it turned out, also Pascal was the source of some of the kind of campy comedy in the movie. He was a bit of a relief where people could laugh or giggle or smile. And all of the horror movies back then, especially the Stephen King films, they all had this element of campy humor. Not a whole lot, but a bit of it.
Yep.
I don't know if you ever saw Creepshow. Creepshow had a lot of that in it, and that was kind of part of that genre. And so all of his movies have these little scenes where there's, some kind of campy in-your-face horror humor. And that was part of what Victor Pascow was, Then in the larger picture, honestly, what he did what the character was in the story for, I think, was a ray of hope to keep the audience hoping maybe things won't turn out so bad. Oh, Pascow is here. Maybe he can save the day, right?
Yeah.
Only to have their hopes dashed again and again. But I think the character was a very important part of the story and quite effective in that way because having that lightness and this character trying to do good against these forces of evil, it makes the tension even more intense than it would have otherwise been. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I was gonna say at the the end of the movie, spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but at the end of the movie, when Lewis is going to bury Rachel, you see Pascow, and he's begging Lewis not to go bury her, and it's just
Yes.
That's just a testament to he's really trying not to have Lewis do any further damage than what's already been done, and I just think he's a really interesting character.
Yeah, that was a tricky shot. I had wanted to do something else there, but because of the special effect with him like walking through me, which was kind of it was a special effect. Because of that, I was very, very much constrained in what I could do. All I could do was stand there and yell and turn. There was nothing else I could do because I had all these ideas. I don't remember specifically what they were, but that was hard because of the effect. I couldn't do much of anything. So, but it still worked. It still worked fine, although the effect is a little bit dated by now.
That's part of its charm, I think, for a lot of the 80 movies.
Yeah.
And Pet Sematary, I can't believe it came out 30 years ago now. What are
Wow, you're telling me. Holy cow, I can't believe it either. It feels like, we shot it like 5 years ago. It's been 30 years.
And what are some of your first things that come to mind when you just you think about this movie?
Well, it was a great opportunity. It was a wonderful shoot. It was hard. It was a hard shoot for me because of the makeup. I spent most of my time in the makeup chair.
Yep.
And because of that, what they would do is they would kind of clump my scenes together. So they would shoot a lot of me in 1 or 2 days. And then I would have like 5 days off. But everybody else was working. So sometimes I'd go to the set and just hang out a little bit. Sometimes I'd hang out at the production office. So I spent a lot of time alone in this little cabin in the woods that I had there. And then when I worked, they were very long days because the makeup would take generally around 4 hours. And then taking it off was another 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
So I got to know the makeup guys, David Anderson and John Blake, really, really well, and we had a great time. We had a great time in that makeup trailer. And then the working with Mary was an absolute delight. It was so easy with her, and working with Dale and Denise, we're all friends now. We go to conventions and sign autographs. Often it's the three of us and Miko, who played Gage,
yep,
and Andrew, who played Zelda, and we're like really good friends for a whole weekend, and then we disperse, and then we're back again at another convention, and we get along so well. It's a great thing,
Yeah.
So my memories are all very fond, in spite of the difficulty of shooting that thing. I only have very good, very fond memories of the whole thing.
I was to say, it must have been, when you're talking about it being, kind of a difficult or just challenging shoot, but it must have been, really rewarding, I imagine, once the film was, completely wrapped up and got to see the finished product with it, being kind of a challenge for you guys.
Well, yes and no. The initial reviews were not very good. Yeah. The movie was very popular, and it made a bunch of money for the time. But the reviews were not, they weren't like great movie. They were quite critical of certain things. Yeah. But none of Stephen King's movies got terrific reviews in those days. He was still kind of, horror was this genre that nobody really wanted to take seriously, and so it was hard to get really, really good reviews for any horror movie, except The Exorcist, of course. But even The Shining didn't get stunning reviews either. Everybody was critical of Stephen King. I don't know how the literary world viewed him, but in the film world, it was like, everything was was an offshoot of Creepshow, and all these cheap, low budget things, and blah blah blah. But they were very, very popular.
Yeah.
So kind of the same reception that Shakespeare got back in his day, where everyone said, "Oh, this is stupid stuff," and then the crowds just flocked to it. So it was kind of a mixed blessing because I think we were all very proud of the film. But, then we get these the critical responses, which weren't bad, but they weren't, like great movie. They were like, yeah, it was good, but blah, 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 and generally went into things that were just part of the genre. You know what I mean?
Which is something I think is, it's kind of interesting, like, now all these years later, because I feel like, it's really developed, like almost like I'd say like a cult-like following, and people look back on it, now at least I think really fondly. So was that something that was kind of hard to hear or see at the time as an actor? Some of the film getting kind of not great reviews.
Well, I mean, now it feels like now it's more popular than it was when it came out. It's hugely popular now, and most of the people that I see at these conventions, they saw it as children.
Yep.
And it just made such an impression on them, and they're just they just so love the film. They adore the film, but you never know what's going to last. I mean, who would have thought? It was at the time it was a low budget horror movie, and it was a challenge and all of that, and it was a great honor to work on a Stephen King film, and especially one where he had written the screenplay.
Yeah,
that was really, really quite special. But who knew it would be so popular 30 years on? And you never know, because I'd done a lot of really good movies back in the 80s, and many of them are kind of forgotten right now, even though they're very, very good films. You just don't know, know. So I'm very happy. I'm very happy that it's so popular now. It's great. It's great.
I was gonna say that was the first time I think I saw this film, I was pretty young, and I remember it scaring the crap out of me. And I revisited it because I picked up the the 30th anniversary, and because I loved this film growing up, so I picked it up, and I rewatched it again. And I don't know if it's because I was so fond of it as a kid and stuff growing up, but like even now I still find it pretty creepy, unsettling, and I just don't understand some of the reviews from back then. I'm not sure where that came from.
I think they were reviews of the genre, that nobody could take it seriously, horror and Stephen King. Because Stephen King, in the way he writes with his novels, you don't see the writing. The writing is not thrown in your face. It's very easy, and you just simply go along. And it's like his skill at writing is very much like the best skill of acting or musicianship. You don't see the skill; it disappears. And so, because they were so accessible, and so his novels were so accessible, and so such a relatively easy read, and so popular, I think there was, looking back, I just think there was a bit of condescension towards it,
Yeah.
Which, now, because of what Stephen King did in the 80s, and what the genre did, now, horror movies are a huge, huge thing, and a very respected genre now,
Yeah. And going back to, you talked a little bit about like the makeup and prosthetic process, for your character. I read something that, I thought, which doesn't, surprise me, but I read that during breaks, like lunch breaks and stuff like that, people didn't really want to sit near you while you had all of your makeup and stuff on.
Yeah, that was at lunch. We would sit at these long tables. Everyone, the cast and crew, would all sit together. And one time early on, I was there, and we were having spaghetti for lunch. And and I sat down in my full makeup, and everybody on the exposed brain side of my head just got up and walked away, and the guy, like the crew member right next to me, said, I'm so sorry, I just can't I can't do it. I hope you understand. It's nothing personal, but I can't eat this spaghetti and see your brain."
That's
So
understandable.
then, from then on, I completely understood it. So from then on, if I had, during the lunch break when I was shooting, I would just go to my trailer and eat alone because I didn't want to gross everybody out,
Yeah.
There were other times when I'd have gotten the makeup off or hadn't gone into makeup yet, and I would sit with everybody. And generally, I sat with, with Fred, Fred Gwynne, because him and I didn't have any scenes, and we just loved talking together about all sorts of things. He was such a generous man. So I'd sit with him and Denise and Dale, and we'd chat and stuff like that. But only if I was not in makeup. When I was in makeup during lunch times, I would just disappear into my trailer.
And that's actually, what you were just saying. That is interesting because I wasn't sure. I know you didn't have any scenes in the film with Fred Gwynne, but you did get a chance to at least kind of talk to him and get to know him while on the set.
Oh, yeah. And we would see each other. I would come on when he was coming off. And so we'd see each other in passing. And I remember this one night, he said, or it was like early morning or something like that, and he had just shot the scene where he told Lewis that he felt responsible for his child's death.
Yeah.
And Fred said to me, "Oh, it was a rough night last night. Rough. It was a tough scene. I was doing the scene, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh." And he said, "Yeah, and I really wanted the tears, but there weren't any tears. No tears. I didn't know what to do." I said, well, what did you do?" "Well," I said, "I tried again and again. Still, I was completely dry. So they had to fix some camera things. So I stepped away and I smoked 3 cigarettes and drank 2 cups of coffee, and I came back and boom, they were there. They were right there."
That's funny.
Which is funny, but it's it's such a practical lesson. He did that to break down his defenses.
Yeah.
His emotional defenses by smoking and drinking coffee. It just like shattered that wall that he couldn't do without that. And it's great acting lesson.
Yep.
So stuff like that, and I do wish we'd had a scene together. I would have loved to have acted with him, but that's not the way the story was written.
Yeah, it's cool though that you at least got to get some knowledge from him and just get to know him too. I think his role as Judd is one of the things too. Along with like Victor Pascow, is some of the things that I think that really really stick out for that movie.
Oh yes, after the movie opened, when the movie opened, I saw it I was living in New York at the time, and I saw a cast and crew screening at the Paramount Theater on Columbus Circle. That was great fun, and then I went to an opening day show, and the theater was sold out; it was packed. And then I didn't see it for like 25 years, I think. Didn't look at it. And then I needed to look at it again for an interview that someone wanted to do for the 25th anniversary or the 20th anniversary. I don't remember what. The DVD coming out,
Yeah.
So I thought, oh man, I better look back at this stuff, because that was the first interview I'd had since the movie had opened.
Oh, wow.
So watching it again, I could finally see it for what it was. For actors, when we first see a movie that we've done, most actors will say this, you don't see the film, you see the day that you shot that scene, So what you see, rather than, for example, the scene walking down the path into the Pet Sematary, I didn't see that scene. What I saw was, the mosquitoes were out and they were crawling under my skull cap and biting me, and I couldn't see the path because it was dark, and I had that contact in my eye, and I had to do this and I had to do that. That's what you see.
Yeah.
So you don't really see the film. But after, 20 years, then I was able to see it for what it was, and I thought, man, Fred Gwynne's performance was the spine of that whole movie. He, in that early scene when the Creeds first arrive at their house and he comes over and talking to them, and someone says, "Well, what's that path there?" I think Rachel says, "What's that path?" That one shot with a few little lines, he sets up the whole tension of the movie when he says, "Oh, that, yeah, there's a story about that, and I'll tell you later."
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, there's a myth going on. We're into the land of mythology, and it's not a good myth. You know, and in these few little lines, this disarming man suddenly just, you know, who you think is a friendly, nice, sweet guy, suddenly, you know, there's this streak of darkness there, and then he says, "Oh, but, you know, later," and it sets up the whole film. And then he carries it through all the way to the end, I think, you know.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. And now, as far as, you know, do you have a favorite scene that you filmed? And then what about like a favorite scene that you weren't in?
Well, I think my favorite scene that I filmed, well, there's two things I'm particularly proud of. The scene when I die, when I'm brought in, that was a very difficult scene, you know, because I had this pump rigged up that went from my hand up my back, up into the skull cap thing, into the brain thing I was wearing,
yep.
And with this tube that went all the way up there, so that at certain points I had to pump this pump while they were carrying me in on a stretcher, pump this pump so that the blood would spurt out of my brain, right?
Yeah.
The problem was, though, you know, it was handheld, the camera work was handheld, and I had to have my eyes rolled up into my head, or that's what I wanted to do. So I couldn't see when the camera was on me, you know? And the Peter Stein, the DP, he said, "Okay, I'm going to be over here when you come around this corner." But what I had to do was I had to, through the rehearsals, learn the route by direction, by feel, because I couldn't see anything. So I'm laying there, and I had to go, "Okay, we're going to turn right." Yes, we turn right, and then we make a sharp left, and then we go around this thing, and there should be the camera. Pump, pump, pump hard so it spurts.
That's pretty
that
impressive.
Was pretty difficult. But that's just a technical thing. When I'm in the scene with Lewis in the you know, when he's trying to revive me, and my eyes spring open and all of that, I think it's a very, very effective scene.
Oh yeah.
And the thing I was like quite proud of, it's hard to see this on a TV if you're watching the DVD, but on the big screen, it's great. When you know, this is an example of why I kept the novel with me. In the novel, he talks about the brightness in Pascow's eyes when he revives, you know, when he wakes up and looks at Lewis, there's this brightness in his eyes, and that's what I really wanted to capture, this brightness in my eyes. How do you do that? I don't know, but I somehow managed to do it by sending this energy through my eyes. And then, you know, on this one marvelous take, as I said, I'll come to you, or whatever that last line was, this tear rolls from my eye down my cheek. And I was like, oh my God, that's a gift from heaven, that this little tear came floating down my cheek just then, because as if, you know, he doesn't want to die. He needs to stay in the corporal world in order to save this guy who tried to save him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was quite proud of that. But I think my favorite shot, personally, is right after that, or when I come back and I'm leading Lewis, before we get to the Pet Sematary, we're in the basement, and he says, "I don't like this dream." And I turn to him and I say, "Who says you were dreaming?" That was my favorite shot. And Mary, like, I think I was that was my first shot of the film. And I think I was just doing too much. I was a young actor, and I was just doing too much. And Mary, like, directed me, and she said, just bring it down, bring it down, bring it down, until we finally got to that reading where it's nice and simple. And that is my favorite scene of my performance, you know?
Yeah.
And otherwise, there's a lot of great scenes. That one I'm talking about, I talked about Fred just saying that little thing about the past. Great, brilliant acting. Another is Rachel's story about Zelda.
Oh.
Denise Crosby was so good with that. Even though there's a lot of it is, flashing to Zelda, so you kind of miss what she's saying, but she's got this long, long speech, and she holds those tears in and holds them in and holds them in until the very end. And even that, telling of that story helps. And because she kept those tears in, it created tension as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's just a brilliant piece of work, I think.
Yeah, no.
So there's many shots too that I just really admire from the cast that I worked with. But those stick out to me right now today.
And as far as just like your character Pasco goes, like I said before, I think he's such an important character to the this first film, and not just the movie itself, but he's featured on the poster art for the film, and then he's also referenced in the title song by the Ramones. Now,
yeah.
When you got this role, did you have any idea of like how big of an impact he was going to have as far as some of these other things go?
No, I had no idea. I didn't know what to think of it. It was a low budget horror movie, and I had a lot of makeup, and it was a shoot, just like many other shoots. So I didn't know. I was quite happy that I was on the poster. That was like a big surprise because I didn't know that. The production office just sent me this tube one day, and I opened it up, and there was a poster with my, the top half of my face on it. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And it was cool. It was really cool walking around New York and seeing this poster with my eyes looking around, looking down on Times Square, for example. That was pretty cool.
and then I was saying, and then also, in the infamous Pet Sematary song by the Ramones, it's just interesting that you were referenced several times, not only in the movie, the poster, the song.
Yeah.
So that must have been pretty cool.
I think the Ramones do that song. That was great. What a brilliant stroke by Mary to have them write and perform that song.
And were there, I know you were, talking about some of like, the scenes that you really liked, both like yourself and then some of the other actors. Were there any scenes that you filmed that didn't make the final cut of the movie?
Oh yeah, there were lots of things. There was, when Judd and Lewis are on their way to the Micmac burial ground, there was a scene with me floating in a tree there when I'm telling them to go back, and I was all in this rig, kind of floating in this treeless, leafless tree. That didn't make it. There were a lot of things in the airport when Rachel is running back that I shot that weren't in the film. Lots of short little, one-line shots that didn't make it. And there was later on, a few months after we had shot, I had to come out to LA to do some green screen work. So, for example, when you see me in the Pet Sematary and I float upwards and become translucent, that was done in a green screen in LA several months later. Oh, and that's another good example of where I used the novel. What they needed there, both on the set and I think in the green screen we only did my feet going up, but in the actual Pet Sematary, the Peter Stein needed me to look up to help with the illusion of Pascal rising up into the air. But in the novel, Stephen King had written this very beautiful little line that said Pascal looked down on Lewis with compassion, something like that. And I really wanted to get that in, and I managed to do that. That caused some discussion, but Mary gave way to me, and so I was able. He falls at my feet crying, and I don't go immediately up. I look down on him, and there's just this moment of compassion looking down on him before I rise up. That was that was a nice little moment too. But when we were in that studio doing the green screen work, we did this whole thing where that would have been on the path into the Pet Sematary, where Pascal starts running and then flaps his arms and flies into the cemetery. Which I thought, wow, that's so cool. And I was rigged up and with wires and things, but I was stationary and the camera went past me, to give the illusion of me flying. And I just thought, man, how cool is this? It's so cool. But that didn't make the final cut. And I don't know why. I have no idea. Maybe it was just a bit too much.
I think it's interesting, though.
So that didn't make it, but it would have been nice to have seen it. And, if they had actually tried to put it together and didn't, it would be a cool thing to see in deleted scenes,
Yeah, no, definitely. And but one of the things I just wanted to say real quick, I think that that's really interesting. How you said you carried the book around with you, on set, and you just throughout different scenes, tried to incorporate, whether it be just like little details, but very important details, from the book into the movie. That's something that I find fascinating. So thank you.
Yeah. When you write a screenplay, you can't put in all those details because the page numbers have to align with the timing of the film. Each page is generally 1 minute, give or take. So if you start putting in all these details, you're not going to know how long your film is, because each page won't be 1 minute. It'll be maybe it's a minute and a half because there's so much detail. And it also drags down the reading of it because the script is kind of a blueprint for not just for the actors and the director, but the cinematography department and the props and sound, and it's for everybody. And everybody has to be able to go through there and find their element quickly and efficiently. So you have to take out an awful lot of stuff that you would love to have in the screenplay. So those, that was a way that I could have a reference to kind of authenticate the character and really get at what Mr. King had written. That's really what I wanted to do, because there was no improving what he had done. I couldn't do that. But what I could do was to honor what he had done by really trying to include some of those beautiful moments he had written. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of Stephen King, actually something I wanted to ask you about was, I know he was very involved, in that first film. He was, he obviously had his little cameo appearance he made. I heard that he was on the set quite a bit. Now, did you get a chance to meet him at all?
Yes, only briefly. I guess Denise and Dale were up there in Maine with Mary and Stephen doing rehearsals, sitting around reading the script. I wasn't there for all of that. I came out later. So I only met him once, and it was on the day that he had done his bit as the minister. Yep. And I had gone through makeup. While he was doing that, I was getting made up for the scene where Lewis is sitting at Gage's gravesite, saying what happened to you was wrong. That scene. Yeah. So I only met him in passing, and I met him, as I was going to my trailer with my lunch, because I wasn't going to sit with everybody. So my hands were full of my lunch tray. I couldn't even shake hands with him, and he came up to me, and I said, I said something like, "Hi, Mr. King, I'm Brad, I'm playing Pasco." And he said, yeah, this makeup looks great. He was like a big kid. "Oh, it's great, I love the makeup. That's terrific." And I said, "Oh, it's a real pleasure to meet you and an honor to be in your film." And he said, "Oh, yeah, thanks. Love the makeup. And then he was gone.
That's funny.
So I wish I'd had a more substantive meeting with him, but it is a very fond memory, nevertheless.
And, as far as the film now, did you keep anything from your time on the set?
Well, they kept all the stuff, like the costume for, reshoots, which, of course, we needed when I was in LA doing the green screen work. So I wasn't. They let me keep the shoes that I wore, and I kept them for a little while until I thought, oh, what are these old shoes doing around from this movie that I made that nobody's watching anymore? So I tossed them out. The costume, they kept the costume. I didn't have any of those brain pieces because they kept all of those. So all I've got from the shoot is, well, I have a sweatshirt, a crew sweatshirt that says Pet Sematary on the back. Yep. And a crew jacket. I've got that, and I think that is all. That's all, and the poster. But that's all. And I have this gym bag that I had bought in Maine because I was going to the gym, and it somehow got a little bit of Victor Pascow blood on it at some point. So there's a 30-year-old fake blood stain on my gym bag.
Nice little souvenir there. And Brad,
maybe I should sell the gym bag at a convention or something. Sell it for $1 gazillion because it has some Victor Pascow blood on it.
Oh, I'm sure someone would definitely like that.
Yeah.
No, Brad, I read that you were, as like a kid, growing up, you were fascinated by horror films at like a, fairly young age. What was it about them that interested you so much?
I think this is something that hasn't changed. When, for teenage boys, there's something about horror that just, that really, that we latch onto very strongly, of looking into that dark side that we're not allowed to look into in normal life. And it must have been something like that. But, for me, it was Frankenstein. Frankenstein was like Karloff's Frankenstein. I just, I'd watch it late at night. There was this, I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and at the time, this was in the 70s, there was a Friday night show hosted by this fellow who called himself Sir Graves Ghastly. He was out of Detroit, and it aired in Detroit and D.C. Sir Graves Ghastly was like, I watched it every Friday night, 11:30, without fail. He was very entertaining, very, very funny, and the movies were scary, and everybody in the house was in bed, and I was alone, and my heart would pound, and it gave me the excitement that one doesn't get every day in a suburban American household or neighborhood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and The Werewolf of London and Wolfman and Dracula, Hunchback of Notre Dame, all of those were just, that's what I lived off of. Probably the scariest one, I think, was Psycho. When I saw Psycho, I was so terrified. When they revealed the mother at the end, I just closed my eyes and I turned around and walked backwards to the TV to turn it off. I was so scared. And I still love those movies. I think Bride of Frankenstein is one of the most brilliant films. It's very campy, but if you look at the images that James Whale set up in that film, they're brilliant. The doctors toasting to gods and monsters. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a great, great film, and I think Bride of Frankenstein is better than the first one, Frankenstein, myself. But both of them are just great. So that that hooked me early on.
Yep. I was gonna say I'm in the same boat as a kid. I remember going to like Blockbuster, and my dad, he used to go with me, and we would rent all the classic, black and white Universal monster movie films. So those were some of my favorites growing up as well.
Yeah, they're just fantastic, and I still watch them. I still, when probably once a year, I watch Bride of Frankenstein. Oh, and I took my whole family to see it. Here in L.A., there are screenings in the cemetery, in Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which is behind Paramount Studios.
Yep.
They do summer screenings of movies, and one year they showed Bride of Frankenstein, so I took my whole family
That's really cool.
Bride of Frankenstein in a cemetery, projected on the back of Rudolph Valentino's mausoleum.
Oh, wow.
How great is that, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds like it must have been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I have to ask you about, I know it's still fairly new, but now have you seen the new Pet Sematary yet?
Yes, yes. In fact, 2 weeks ago, maybe Denise and I went together. Denise Crosby and I. And there's a funny story about that. We we went to a theater in her neighborhood, and it was a relatively new theater, and we went to a Wednesday afternoon show because we thought, okay, nobody will be there; it'll be easier, So we get there, and I'm buying the tickets, and right now I've got this big beard, so nobody recognizes me at all from Pet Sematary unless it's announced,
Yeah.
But Denise, she looks the same. She just, she looks the same as she did when we shot it. And so we're standing there, and the manager is showing me how to use the ticket machine because I'm making a mess of it. And Denise was standing there, and she said, we were in the original. And he said, what? The manager said, what? He said, yeah. She said, yeah, this is Brad, and I'm Denise, and we were in the original Pet Sematary. He was like, oh, great. Well, thanks for coming to our theater. Oh, yes, blah, blah, blah. So he handed us off to an usher who sat us in the theater, and, there were like 20 minutes before the show, and nobody else came into the theater, so we had the theater all to ourselves to watch the remake. And afterwards, the two of us sat there discussing it to pieces. And then finally the manager came in and we said, oh, yeah, we need to go. I'm sorry, but it looks like nobody else showed up. And he said, yeah, well, as soon as you guys sat down, I blacked out the theater for you. And we were like, what? He said, yeah, I blacked it out. Look, you guys deserved a private screening of the new one. So
wow.
There it is. Isn't that sweet? The sweetest thing ever. Oh, I couldn't believe it. It was so nice of him, so kind.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we had a private screening.
Now,
so yeah, I saw it. I think it was, it was a very good updating of the genre, because the horror genre has changed so much. The horror movies right now, they don't have that campy humor that the 80s horror movies did.
Yep.
So that was taken out, and that was a lot of what I did, the jump scares, that's very popular now, so there's plenty of those in there. And I thought, overall, they sacrificed some things that our original film had for other things that are more current to the genre, So I think it was a very good attempt to make something for, not for so much for fans of the original, but for a new generation. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. And
yeah, but it's very hard for me to be objective because I don't watch so many of the new horror films these days. I watch some here and there, but I'm not a huge fan of the genre right now. It's not that I dislike it; I just haven't had the time to really delve into it, and so I'm not sure. I don't really have my fingers on the pulse of the genre today. So I can't really say whether I think it's a great film or it's not a great film. I don't know, but I think the action of updating it was great. I think it was a great thing for them to do, and I hope it's playing well for younger audiences. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to ask you, just as far as is it weird to have a remake come out of a movie that you were a part of the original in?
Yeah, it's really weird. It's really weird to be driving around LA and see all these Pet Sematary posters and not have something to do with it. That's very strange. But it's also, it's quite an honor to have been in a film that merited a remake. Yep. That's great. That's wonderful. So I hope the film does well, and that it creates a whole new generation of fans for Pet Sematary and Stephen King's work in general.
And is there anything else that you would like to say to the fans out there, Brad?
Yeah, I go to these conventions, and when I started doing these conventions, it was it was like 10 years ago, I guess, and I was kind of apprehensive about it. I thought, what a weird thing to do. But the fans are so sweet and so kind and so generous with their compliments. It's like I'm so moved that there are so many people that love what we did back in 1988 with the filming of Pet Sematary, and how grateful they are that we had made it and all of that. It's just wonderful. So any of you fans out there who are listening, and I know I say this not only for myself, but from the rest of the cast members, because we all agree about this. You guys are great. You guys are so wonderful, and thank you for supporting this movie that is now 30 years old, and for still loving it and enjoying it. Thank you. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Well, Brad, I want to say, thank you, one for, being part of this, one of my favorite, films, horror films, growing up. But I also want to thank you for, taking time out of your schedule to come on this show. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're absolutely welcome. It's a real pleasure, Pat. Your questions were terrific, and it was a pleasure to talk to you. It was a real pleasure. It's fun.
You as well.
Well, thank you. Hi, this is Brad Greenquist, and you're watching Pop Culture with Pat. Remember, the barrier was not meant to be crossed. The ground beyond